Good evening, everybody. This is the BHS FASFA informational meeting. We'll be getting started here in 5 minutes. We'd like to remind everybody to feel free to ask general questions in the chat. However, any personal questions should be directed to Dr. Smith directly through her email and/or appointment through the counselor office. We'd also like to remind all the students and parents to make sure that you have your FAFSA packets that were sent home with the students. If not, they can be accessed via the website under Dr. Smith in the high school website links. We'll be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bluffton High School FAFSA informational meeting. This is a meeting for all those who are interested in learning more about the FAFSA. This will be provided as courtesy from the Bluffton High School Counseling Office, as well as the Bluffton University, Tonight's meeting will be overseen by Lawrence Matthews, Director of Financial Aid at Bluffton University, along with Dr. Elizabeth Smith, High School Guidance Counselor for Bluffton High School. We'd like to now turn the time over to Dr. Smith for some important announcements before the meeting gets started.
If you have any questions, you can also post those in the chat as we're going along. Do want to welcome Lawrence Matthews here from Bluffton University doing this for us. And, you know, he's the expert in all of this information, and it is very important. And there's a lot of good things that are going to come to you tonight through this presentation. All the handouts were emailed to your students. We did have a copy available in the school counseling office, and we still have more copies. So if you don't have them, if you're following along at home with the ones that were emailed, that's fine. If you want a hard copy, you're more than welcome to stop in the office tomorrow or even next couple days to pick those up. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence Matthews. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and I also want to welcome you and thank you for taking time for this important information that I'll share tonight. I'll start a little slow here. There might be a few people still logging on, and that'll give me a moment to just do a little bit longer introduction of myself and how this is going to go tonight. So first of all, let me just say that I am a 1978 graduate of Bluffton College at the time, now Bluffton University, and I've been on staff pretty much ever since. So this is actually a picture of my senior year at Bluffton College. Yeah, enough of that, right? So let me just make sure I got this working here. There we go. Also, this is my 25th year as Director of Financial Aid, and my 21st year actually presenting for Bluffton High School. So I want to thank Liz and Mr. Rackley for inviting me and helping out with this presentation tonight. I do understand it's being recorded, so better than Netflix, you can go back and watch it over and over to your heart's delight, or people that couldn't make it to the live presentation will have the opportunity to view it later, or just sections of it if that's what you're looking for. But it goes back to the days of Rick Shaner and Gordon Shively, who also invited me to present. I want to thank Dr. Smith for inviting me again tonight. So thank you for that. So the program tonight is about information for any type of higher education after high school. So it could be a 2-year or 4-year program, public or private school, trade school, any type of education after high school. This information should be applicable, short programs, longer programs, and so forth. So hopefully you'll find it helpful. And it's also good for not just in Ohio, but anywhere in the United States. This information is applicable. And hopefully you'll be glad you spent the time this evening, or if you're watching later on recorded. Mr. Rackley did mention the handouts, and this is the PowerPoint handout. If you have it, it'd be great. You can follow along, take a few notes if you choose to do that, or get it later if you don't have it tonight. But I will be following that PowerPoint handout very, very closely, and I'll refer to other handouts as we go throughout the evening. I should just mention the picture on the wall behind me. If you don't recognize that, that is the swinging bridge at the Nature Preserve. And if you haven't been out there lately, it is a beautiful time to walk out there. The trails are all trimmed and mowed, and it's just a great time during daylight hours to be out there at the preserve. So take advantage of that if you haven't been able to do that of late. Also, there's a poster on the wall back there that I'm going to mention later. It's actually part of my program, and I'll reference that a little bit later in the program. So tonight we'll focus on the different ways of awarding aid, filling out and filing the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and then I'll briefly mention the aid, some of the aid programs, although I'll let you mostly read up on that yourself, but I do have some slides that refer to some of the programs. This is not a slide on your handout, but I just want you to know that I'm gathering this information from several sources. We have a National Association of Professional Financial Aid Administrators, an Ohio Association, and of course the Federal Department of Education, who actually produces the FAFSA and a lot of the programs that students are eligible for. So I'm cobbling all this information together and putting it into a presentation that I hope is understandable and takes some of the mystery out of the process for you. So first, the types of financial aid. The gift aid is the free money, scholarships and grants. Of course, you always want to make sure you're eligible for as maximum free money as you can get by filing the FAFSA, by doing well in high school with your grades and so forth, applying for loans. We'll talk about that throughout the evening. And then the self-help aid, which is student loans, parent loans. Those are always optional. If they're offered, you don't have to take them, but you're going to be offered loans, as well as campus work or community service work and so forth. That's all part of financial aid. Three categories of aid. Merit-based aid is the one we think of the most. That's scholarships based on performance, and typically for most all students, that's your high school GPA, your cumulative high school GPA. So I will say to juniors who are on the call tonight, if you're not where you think you can be, just keep striving for those higher GPAs so that you have a better chance. I hear so many students say to me that, man, I wish I'd have just put a little more effort in when I was a sophomore, junior, even freshman, and because they would have gotten a higher scholarship here or at another school that they are attending. But also, and also seniors, don't let up either. You've got a whole year ahead of you. So most colleges now are admitting students based on high school GPA only, but many of us are also test optional, meaning we don't require an ACT or SAT in order for you to be admitted to the school. However, we might have an ACT or SAT score that's required to receive, say, for example, a science scholarship in addition to the merit that you receive when you're admitted with your high school GPA, or say a music major to be in a performing section of that scholarship might need an ACT score at a certain level and so forth. So just be aware that for admission, often it's just high school GPA depending on the college, but merit scholarships might come in if you have a higher, it might be required for an ACT or SAT score. So just keep that in mind. But again, performance can also be athletics if you're applying to a D1 or D2 NCAA school or an NAIA school that offers athletic scholarships. Music and art are also performance if you're majoring in those areas. Like I said earlier, sciences and so forth. Those are all performance-based merit scholarships. Have nothing to do usually with the FAFSA. But then the need-based grants and need-based grants and loans come from filing the FAFSA, and we'll explain how that works throughout the program. But even when you file the FAFSA and you don't qualify for need-based aid, there is non-need-based loans that students can take out that are very good in terms of their interest rates and repayment options and so forth. So why file the FAFSA? Well, we'll get into that throughout the evening, but there's so many reasons to file the FAFSA, especially that first year that your student's attending college. The financial aid office at this school where your student ends up needs some sort of a base to work with. And you'll hear later that when you file the FAFSA for next fall, you're going to be using your 2020 federal tax returns, and then your students enroll next fall, 2022. That's about a year and a half, 2 years after the tax year that you actually used for that FAFSA. So lots of things can change, and it's important that the financial aid office have that information for lots of reasons. It's to your benefit. What goes into the FAFSA? Well, there's these principles that Congress has put into play that to the extent they're able, parents have the primary responsibility to pay for their dependent child's education. Students also have a responsibility, and we'll address both of those issues as we go throughout the evening. Another principle is that families should be evaluated in their present condition. But again, we're looking back to 2020 and things can change in the meantime. So we'll talk about special circumstances. And that's the third pearl here, that a family's ability to pay must be evaluated in an equitable and consistent manner. And we do that by everybody in the country filing the exact same form, the FAFSA, so that that's the equitable part of determining financial aid. So we need to talk about what is the definition of need in order to understand how it works at different colleges and so forth. So all colleges start with what we call a cost of education, which is made up of the tuition and fees at that school. If your student is living on campus, room and board, books, supplies, we make an estimate of all of those for all students, and we add all those numbers up into one number called a cost of attendance or cost of education. And then when you file the FAFSA, which looks at the student's income and assets, parents' income and assets, again, runs through a formula, and one number comes out called the expected family contribution, or the EFC. By the way, that EFC is officially changing name in the next couple of years. It's going to be called the Student Aid Index, or SAI. So if you have a pencil, you might want to jot that down in case somebody says to you at a school SAI instead of EFC, you'll know they're talking about the same thing. But we take that expected family contribution, or EFC, subtract it from our cost, and what's left over is eligibility for need-based aid. Every school in the country has to follow that formula. And of course, there's different costs at different schools. I want to mention a couple quick things about what goes into the formula. And this slide has to do with the students' earnings from work. So there's a lot of numbers on here, but focus on that right-hand column and the 22-23 FAFSA. In the formula, it's going to say that a student can earn over $7,000 in year 2020. Remember, it's looking back at tax year 2020. So a student can earn up to $7,040 before even one penny is counted in the formula. So this is an argument that if students have the opportunity to have a part-time job, a summer job, and so forth, it will not hurt their financial aid unless they earn quite a bit more than $7,000, because there's other offsets besides just that income protection allowance. So students might not want to hear this, but hey, get a job, right? It's possible to have a part-time job and it will not negatively impact your EFC. So the EFC is calculated according to a formula by law that comes out of Congress. It stays the same regardless of what colleges you're applying to. So you fill out the FAFSA, you list up to 10 colleges to receive that information, and your EFC is the same at Rhodes, at Bluffton, at UCLA, or anywhere else in the country. It's the same information going to every school that you list. It's the same. And it's an index number. That's why they're changing it to Student Aid Index. It's an index number that financial aid offices use to be able to distribute aid to the best of their ability to their student population. So this is the formula then, and how it plays out at our different colleges. So on the left-hand side, you see cost of attendance minus EFC equals eligibility for need-based aid. So I have an example of 3 colleges here, 3 different prices: a $58,000 school, a $40,000, and a $22,000. Again, this is all of the fees added up minus the EFC. So this family applied to these 3 different schools. Their EFC is the same. The need at the first school is $50,000, the second school $32,000, and then $14,000. So if all 3 schools meet 100% of the need, in essence, we just equalize the cost so that the student can choose the school where they are going to be most successful, has the program that they want, and so forth. Now, in a perfect world, it would work exactly like that. It doesn't. It's close to that, and schools have to follow that formula. But this is one reason why we say file the FAFSA, because depending on the cost of a school, you might have need even if you have a pretty good income and so forth, because of this kind of a formula that goes into play. Now, the best way to know what your cost is going to be, there's another handout that was made available to you, or you can get later. It's a cost comparison worksheet. So what you do as you're applying to different colleges and you begin to get award offers from the different schools, list them on a spreadsheet like this, or create your own. and put down the direct costs of the schools, the tuition fees, room and board if they're living on campus, and then list all the free money, add that up and make a subtraction. And then compare that number to each school that you're looking at, the cost minus the free money, and then compare what you still have out of pocket, which you can then cover with payment plans or loans or whatever. But that's how you do an apples to apples comparison of college cost, by doing that kind of work. And then once you narrow it down to 1 or 2 schools, be sure to go to that school when you meet with them and say, okay, this is what my student qualified for their first year. Is this aid all renewable? And if not, what are the criteria for it to be renewable or not? So that you have a picture of the full program. If it's 2-year full program or a 4-year program, is it going to be aid that's going to follow that student all the way through the program? So to me, this is one of the most important things to know, is how to compare college costs. Don't look at the sticker price alone. Wait till you get the aid offers at the free money, and then do that math and see where you end up. And that will go a long way to help you understand the actual cost for the college or colleges that your students are looking at. Also, every college is required by law to have what is called a net price calculator on their website. So you should go to any website that your student is looking at, where the school attends, and in their search engine on their homepage, type in net price calculator, and it should take you to the option of putting in like your student's high school GPA, maybe an ACT score if they took one, and then you can even go as far as listing, you know, your household income and those kinds of things. And it is supposed to calculate what your situation would be at that school, the merit scholarships that they qualify for, and then even need-based aid if you put in your income and that kind of thing. So that's just another option that you have, depending on how much time you want to spend on this. It's a great tool at each school. It's required by law. So here I want to mention scholarships, outside scholarships, and this is where I want to turn it over to Dr. Smith for a few minutes to talk about your system at Bluffton High School for understanding what local scholarships are available and what her process is for students to apply for those. So Liz, if you're available there.
Yep. So thank you, Lawrence. So real quick, I'll address the juniors first, because the rest of it will pertain to them in the following year, and I'll get to the stuff for seniors. So the juniors would need to know that the ball medal scholarship, the cans really should be collected starting, if they want to do it, this year, because they're turned in September of their senior year. So oftentimes students want to apply for it, but it's based on the amount of cans that they turn in. The students with the top depends, either 3 to 5 ton winners, or whatever it may be, however many tons of cans they turn in, but the top 3 to 5 students are awarded that scholarship. So that's not something you want to try to just scramble to get. So if you know you have access to quite a bit of cans, you'd like to do the ball medal scholarship and you're a junior, then you want to start your collection. Now the rest of them, and they award one winner. Well, they have 8 member schools, and so it depends on who has the top cans for that. As far as seniors go, I talked to all the seniors yesterday and reminded them that their Naviance system, their logins that they have, provides a lot of good information to them, not just with Supermatch for colleges, but also for scholarship searches. And these are nationwide. Some of them are more dialed into Ohio, some of them may be university based, but it is a huge search engine that they have access to for scholarships. I told them also treat those scholarships like homework. Be checking the high school website for updated scholarships and Naviance for updated scholarships, and try to do 1 to 3 a week, because it's free money. So it just costs you your time. So with that being said, the other really good place to look is on my school counselor webpage. real easy. It's on the high school page, and in the left column on the high school main page, it says School Counselor. When you click on that, you'll get my page, and it's all alphabetized, and you just click on scholarships, and all the active scholarships are posted there. So if it's a hard copy, I will have that available here, but most of those are now digital online. Students can apply online for scholarships, and I'll post the link for those as well. And the due date, I always put that on there. Our real big local scholarships that we have, those usually come out in January. Some are set to come out in February, and then they're usually due back, depending on which ones they are, March and April. Those that are awarded at our academic banquet in May, those winners are announced. So like I said, just have your students continuously checking that, maybe once a week. But even when it gets into those months of January, February, that's really the season for scholarships. And so I would suggest even a couple times a week during that time. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I can't stress everything that she just said. It's absolutely critical that students are spending time on that. Homework, part-time job, whatever you want to call it, it can really pay off. And I can say, just how many students now are bringing in outside scholarships when they come to Bluffton, sometimes in the thousands of dollars, multiple, some are small, some are larger, some are renewable, many are not, but even $500 or whatever can be very, very helpful to help pay for college. So pursue those. And also more and more, this is the job market is really hot right now, and a lot of employers are now, even more than they were before, offering scholarships to their employees or their employee dependents because they're trying to attract workers or keep workers. So that's something else that's really ramping up. I noticed this year is especially more employers are giving their employees or their dependents outside scholarships. So definitely check into that. Also, your church, if you attend a church, see if they are offering money to your students going to higher education. So pursue all of that. And then, of course, avoid the scams, right? Just anything that comes through your email. If you don't know where it's coming from, if it's not coming from your high school or something you trust, just delete it, get rid of it, and don't click on those links and so forth. And make sure your students are aware of that as well. A word about deadlines. The word is real. They are real. And so Dr. Smith just mentioned some that are coming out in your area, February, March. You may have deadlines. Don't miss those. There's FAFSA deadlines, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But just pay attention to outside scholarship deadlines and so forth. When should you file the FAFSA? If you're a high school senior, parent of a high school senior, when should you file? Well, it opens this Friday on October 1, believe it or not, and it's based on the 2020 tax year. So most of us, probably 100% of us, have our 2020 taxes done. And that's the advantage of that now filing in October. So, but when should you file? I mean, you can start on October 1, but when should you file? So another handout that is available to you, you might have it or it's available in her office, is this FAFSA priority deadline handout. These are all the schools in Ohio that responded to a survey that our OASFA organization puts out. So there's 3 pages of schools on here, and they list their deadlines for they call them priority deadlines. And I'll give you an example of what this means. So for example, on they're alphabetical. So I'm going to look at Bluffton University and Bowling Green. They're right next to each other on this handout. And it says, do we have a FAFSA priority deadline? We both do. Bluffton's is May 1st next spring, but Bowling Green's is January 15th. And then when will we start mailing award offers? That's listed on here too. Bluffton starts on December the 10th, if everything's in, and Bowling Green starts on February the 1st. So let's say that you're applying to 2 schools like Bluffton and Bowling Green, and then 5 other schools that may or may not be on this list. If they're out of state, you wouldn't know. You find the school with the earliest deadline and make sure you get your FAFSA filed before that deadline. Of course, if you're filing now in October or November, you're going to hit everybody's priority deadline. But what you'll need to pay attention to is when your students are repeating their sophomore, junior, senior year, don't get lazy about filing the FAFSA. Always file early, because those deadlines are going to apply not just your freshman year, but as you go through all 4 years, probably if it's a 4-year school. So keep that in mind and pay attention to those priority deadlines. Priority deadline simply means that at some point, in Bowling Green's case, by February 15th, or I'm sorry, January 15th, they typically might run out of some money that was available. And if you file after that date, you might miss that money. Same at Bluffton. We have students who filed after May 1st, particularly returning students. They get lazy, even though they get lots of reminders. And we ran out of campus-based money, so some SEOG money, and even federal work study that we ran out of because we have a certain amount the government gives us. So those are why we have priority deadlines, and don't miss those, okay? So what are the steps to file the FAFSA? First-time FAFSA filers. Well, first and foremost, you have to apply at the schools that you want to see an award offer from. We will not send out offers. It's even hard to talk to a student or family if they haven't been accepted at our school, because we don't know what their merit scholarships are and so forth. So apply for admission, go through the process for admission. I'm sure that high school seniors are being, hopefully getting that process done, because the earlier you're accepted at different schools, the more likely you're going to see award offers earlier as well. You can also and should apply for the FSA ID, which is your electronic signature for the FAFSA. So this is the website here at the bottom of this screen, fsaid.ed.gov. And you can do that now. You don't have to wait till October 1. Parents, if you already have an FSA ID from another student that's in school, or maybe you yourself were taking classes and you have your that FSA ID is your signature. So it's good going forward on everybody's applications that you're looking at. But a student, if you don't have one yet, a high school senior, you need to apply for that. It's better to do it up front. It doesn't take long at all, just a couple of minutes. But a couple caveats. You definitely want to use your cell phone number, your personal cell phone number, and your email address, but not your, if you have one at Bluffton High School, use a Gmail or Yahoo or something that's not the high school, because that could go away, and you want an email that's going to be good, you know, throughout your college career as you're filling out that form. So get that done, because if you have your signatures ready to go, that's one step out of the way when you're ready to submit the FAFSA. Again, these steps: apply for admission, get that FSA ID, and then complete and transmit the FAFSA after October 1, so starting this Friday. And the good news is you don't have to finish it all in one sitting. When you start filling out the FAFSA online, it'll ask you if you want to create what's called a save key. It can be, you know, the name of your pet or whatever. And you can start filling it out and then save it and leave and come back later, maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, whenever, and put in that, you know, log in and put in that save password, and it'll you can just keep filling out from where you left off. So that's a really good tool. You can go in there multiple times and using that save key. And then once you submit it, that save key is no longer any good because it's going to be processed, and then they'll send you the results, and you log in with your FSA ID to see the results and so forth. Now, you can list up to 10 colleges on that initial FAFSA to receive that data. You can't fill it out and not list any college. It will not let you submit. You have to list at least one, but also up to 10. And then maybe later on, after you submit it, sometime during the year, you think, man, I really want to look at this other school I hadn't even considered. You can log back in and through a correction process, add another school that didn't originally exist on your initial FAFSA. And if you had 10 schools initially, you can just take one off and add a new one in there and so forth. So lots of options going forward with the FAFSA. I did put in the packet and available to you what is called a FAFSA on the web worksheet. This just goes through the questions that you're going to encounter once you're online. kind of in the order that they're going to come up. But there is skip logic built into the FAFSA. So every question on here might not come up for you depending on how you answer certain questions. But this is available to you if you want to look at it ahead of time. You don't have to use it because the FAFSA is pretty intuitive. But for some people, it's nice to have something in front of you in writing, not just on the web sometimes. So this is what it looks like, the front page. And it follows the questions as they come up on the web. So this is the actual screenshot of FAFSA on the web and the website. The arrow is pointing to studentaid.ed.gov. That's where you go for all things, not just FAFSA, but student loans and so forth. But for the FAFSA, you click on apply for aid on this site, and then you'll see a link or a button called start here. And that's where you log in for the first time and so forth. But if you're a return, let's say that you submitted it and now you want to go back and add another school later on, you log in under returning user and add that school. If you use the save key, you're logging in under start here until after you submit it. Again, once you click that, then you click that you're the student. Or you can say the parent, but the parent can't actually log in. You can start filling it out with the student identifiers, but the student's FSA ID is what you want to use to log in with, because that's who's submitting it, is the student. Parent, you need to add your information and also your electronic signature, but it's the student's FAFSA, not the parents. Only students may use their FSA ID to log in. Okay, some frequent errors that come up when you're filing the FAFSA. It is easy, in quotes, easy and intuitive. There's skip logic built in. Most of you will be able to transfer your IRS data into the FAFSA using what is called the data retrieval tool. And again, I say this over and over, the tax year is 2020. So that's why we can start having you fill it out in October, because we're not looking at the current tax year, we're looking at the tax year that ended on December 31, 2020, which most of us filed, by April 15th or a little bit later because of COVID maybe. But regardless, you probably have your 2020 tax return on file with the IRS. So, you're good to go. So some errors are, parents filling it out on behalf of their student and they answer a question about themselves when in fact it was a student question and so forth. So that happened. Social Security numbers, please double check, triple check anytime you're using a Social Security number to make sure you didn't invert a number. This is really critical when you're filling out your FSA ID to get that right, and then it should flow right into the FAFSA. By the way, when you log into the FAFSA and you've already got an FSA ID, I think some of the questions are pre-filled because it recognizes who that FSA ID belongs to. Another area that causes confusion and errors are divorced, widowed, remarried, parental information issues. We'll talk about those in a minute. So for example, who is the parent on the FAFSA form? And for your benefit, I'm going to cover a little bit here on the screen, but there's another handout that I gave to Dr. Smith to give to you, which goes into quite a bit of detail. And this is right off of what is traditionally known as the paper FAFSA, which nobody sees anymore. I have a copy I'll show you in a moment, but this is right off of the paper instructions for who is a parent on the FAFSA. And that's available to you if you want to read all the details. But the parent is the legal, biological, or adoptive parent or step parent of the student. In the case of divorced, separated parents, the FAFSA rule, this is the FAFSA rule, not the college rule, is that the parent who the student lived with more in the past 12 months must use their information. If that parent is remarried, the step parent's information must also be included. A non-custodial parent's information is not used. Also, if parents are not married, but biological parents not married but live together, both parents need to be on the form. Parents are married but living apart, still both parents need to be on the form. In other words, there's not a divorce or a legal separation and so forth. Now, this is interesting. The tax year again is 2020, But the marital status is as of the date that you complete the FAFSA. So let's say that in 2020 you were married, but when you fill out the FAFSA starting after October 1, in fact, I just have been working with a student here on campus whose father passed away in June, and they just now filled out the FAFSA. So the mom filled it out as she's a widow, okay? Even though she was married in 2020, now she's a widow, and that's how she filled out the FAFSA for the first time, and only included her information on the tax section. So again, marital status as of the date you complete the FAFSA, tax filing status December 31 of 2020. Other FAFSA errors, I already mentioned, I guess I mentioned those three. Income from work earned by the parent and step parent. So when you fill out the FAFSA, you're putting in the adjusted gross income. That comes right off of the IRS 1040, but the income from work, your W-2s, or if you're self-employed, you have to enter that manually in the FAFSA. That does not come across on the data retrieval tool. And so you might have to have your W-2s, or if you're self-employed, your self-employment forms to be able to list how much you actually earn from work, which is a different question than the adjusted gross income. It's very important to get that right, excuse me, because that income from work is an offset that brings the EFC down. You do have to list untaxed income. There's a whole list of those in the FAFSA form, including child support received for all children. In a moment, we'll talk about special circumstances and how that might influence you going forward if you're actually receiving child support. Another thing that sometimes people get wrong if they're entering the information manually is they put down their tax withheld instead of what they actually paid. So it's very important to read the directions, follow the directions on the FAFSA, and make sure you're listing taxes paid. They tell you what line to pull that off of on your 1040 so that you get that right. Sometimes people put what was withheld, and that throws things off. Another question that comes up is household members. How many people, including mom and dad and other siblings and the student, live in the household? That's a very important question. And how many of those are going to be attending college next year? But if the parent is him or herself attending college, you're not allowed to list the parent on the student's FAFSA. But again, that can be a special circumstance we'll talk about in just a moment. Another thing to talk about is real estate and investment net worth, and we'll talk about that here directly. So investments are real estate, but not the home you live in, but it includes trust funds, money market, and mutual funds, CDs, stocks, bonds, commodities, and so forth. It's the current market value minus the debt equals the net worth. If you have things other than your home and so forth, like a rental property would be an example of real estate that you would have to list, or a summer home or a cottage, you know, up in Michigan or whatever, but not the home you live in. You do have to list education benefits and savings accounts like Coverdell's 529s or the former prepaid tuition plans, but it's the asset of the parent, not the student. So if you're saving through a 529 and it's for the student, it's in their name, but it's listed under the parent who holds that, okay? And you must include, this is what trips up some people. Let's say you have 3 children and they each have a 529. The FAFSA directions are very clear. You have to list all of the 529 values for all of the children, not just the one attending college. But again, it goes under the parent assets, which is treated more favorably than under the student. And again, I have a handout that comes right off of the FAFSA, which goes into minutia about what kinds of assets do need to be listed and which ones are not listed. And I'm going to, on the screen here, go through more of the ones you do not list. This list is what you do not put on the FAFSA. I already mentioned the primary house that you live in. None of that gets listed. You don't list the value of life insurance. You don't list the value of traditional retirement plans or cash savings and checking that you already, there's another place that you list cash savings and checking. So don't double count it is the point here. and this is really important, if you own a small business, which means 100 or fewer full-time employees or equivalent, none of the business assets get listed on the FAFSA. Not the buildings, the equipment, whatever that's part of that business. The assets are excluded. The same with a family farm that you live on and operate. So this is really big, because if you are a farmer, way back in the past, you had to list the value of the land, of the equipment, you know, if you had livestock, the grain and everything else. None of those assets are counted on the FAFSA, just the income that would show up on your adjusted gross income on your 1040. So all of those you do not include on the FAFSA assets. Talk a bit about the IRS data retrieval tool. Beginning in October, this Friday, students and parents who have completed their 2020 tax return may be able to use FAFSA on the web to electronically view their tax information. And with just a few simple steps, the tax information can also be securely transferred into the FAFSA. This is a great tool. It takes so much of the mystery out of it. It has eliminated a lot of the verification rules that we have to follow if families are able to use the data retrieval tool. One important caveat: when accessing the DRT with FAFSA on the web, you will be asked to enter the address that is on your federal tax return, and you must be precise. So, you know, parents, when you come to that section of the FAFSA and you want to click on that data retrieval tool, the first thing it's going to ask you to do is list the name and address that's on the IRS form. So have that handy, and then type in, you know, the exact number and street address, whatever's on the tax return, because that's how they make sure it's your information that they're going to transfer. And then you can actually, it'll take you to the IRS website. You can view the information, and then you can choose to transfer that back into the FAFSA or not. That's your choice. But if you do, in the financial aid office, we get a message on your FAFSA results that says, hey, this family used the data retrieval tool, which means their information is accurate. You know, they weren't manually entering it, they were pulling it straight from the IRS. So a great option. And I would say 70–80% of our filers are now using that tool, which is fantastic. There are a few people who cannot use it, and I have them all listed here, but the one that would apply to anybody on this call and this meeting tonight probably is somebody who's married and filed head of household, or if you're married and filed separately. There's no way that the FAFSA can bring in those kinds of options. And if you're married and filed as head of household, that's actually not technically possible. And so that's why those can't happen. So anyway, just there's some other ones here, like if you're filed a foreign tax return, that kind of thing. But most people, you know, can use the data retrieval tool. So again, I mentioned this word called verification. The federal government actually selects a certain number of FAFSA filers for this process. It's to help keep integrity in the process. So if yours is selected, then the schools that your student is interested in attending, who you listed on the FAFSA, is going to be asking you to verify the information. If you use the IRS data retrieval tool, they will not need to see copies of your tax returns, but they might need a list of how many people live in your household and how many of those are attending college. And the verification materials come from the school and are sent back to the school, not to the federal government. So again, the IRS data retrieval tool takes some of that pain out of that process. About 25–30% of FAFSA filers are selected, and they tell us it's random, so we don't know what their criteria is for selecting. So apply for admission, get that user FSA ID, and then complete the FAFSA, sign and submit it. Once you've submitted it, you'll get a result called the student aid report. They'll email you. In fact, as soon as you hit submit, it will calculate your EFC, and you'll see it right on the confirmation screen. And make sure you actually get a confirmation. Sometimes people fill everything out and they're reviewing it and it looks like everything's finished and you're good to go. and they log out before they submit it. Okay. So, and then they call us and say, did you get my FAFSA? No, we didn't get it. And I'll say, well, I know I finished it. Yeah, but you didn't submit it. So make sure you hit the submit button and you see a confirmation page, and you should be able to print that if you have a printer, or at least write things down. Okay. Then they'll email you with the results as well, with a link back to those results and so forth. You can make corrections after that. Or you can contact the financial aid office at one of the schools that you're looking at and talk to them about a correction if you think something needs to be changed. We as the school can make the change for you if you've listed us on your FAFSA. And then complete and mail any supplemental forms that the college or the state maybe requires. That could include the verification paperwork we talked about. It could be something else. Sometimes students get selected for what is called identity, and they have to submit like a copy of their driver's license or something. I don't know. It doesn't happen very often, but things like that can happen. And then wait for the financial aid offer from the college or university from the different ones you've listed. And again, you can look at that priority deadline handout that I talked about earlier. And if the student is admitted and filed the FAFSA and listed that school, then those offers should be coming out either through the mail, or some schools will send those out electronically and have a way for you to access those. At Bluffton, at least, we're still mailing everything out for the first year until the student comes to orientation, and then we go electronic after that. But we want families to be able to open up the envelope and sit down and go over it together at the dining room table, or however you communicate in your household. So we're using mail. Some schools do, some schools don't, but you won't get an offer unless the student is admitted and you listed them on the FAFSA. This is a picture of last year's FAFSA, and I'm holding a copy of a draft of this year for the 22-23 year. They won't let us have the official until October 1 for some reason, but it's blue this time. You'll never see these because they're not really, you can call and get one, but it's a 10-page document. Thank goodness you don't have to fill out 10 pages anymore. But the reason I'm showing this to you is a very specific reason. On the very front of this paper FAFSA, and I'm pointing to it and blowing it up there in the text, there's a statement that says this: if you or your family experience significant changes to your financial situation, such as loss of employment or other unusual circumstances, such as tuition expenses at an elementary or secondary school, or high unreimbursed medical or dental expenses, complete this form to the extent you can and submit it as instructed, and then consult with the financial aid office at the college or colleges you applied to or plan to attend. So the federal government is actually telling you that not only should you report special circumstances, but they are absolutely encouraging it. And I mentioned to you earlier, let me go to the next slide. These are some examples of the kinds of things that we look at constantly. Child support ending. I mentioned earlier, you have to list child support, but if it's ending when your student turns 18 or finishes high school, then you report that as a special circumstance, and we have the authority to document that with you and take it out. Medical not covered by insurance, parent loss of income, property loss not covered by insurance. I was just in Dayton earlier today where we've been helping out with the 2019 tornado, and believe me, there were thousands of homes damaged and many of them were not covered by insurance. So hopefully that doesn't happen to any of you, but it's something that does happen. Unusual debt or one-time income, tuition at an elementary, secondary school, or even a parent in college. Again, you could not list the parent on the student's FAFSA, but if the parent is going to school and filling out their own FAFSA, using financial aid to pay for their college education, we have the authority to add that parent back in, which makes a difference in the EFC. So I mentioned this postcard hanging on the wall back here. We even went to the extent this year at Bluffton. This postcard is called "Students, You May Qualify for Additional Financial Aid Support." And we mailed these out to all the families of students who are attending here this fall, and put a copy of this also in the student mailboxes. And on the back is exactly the information that's on the screen in front of you. So we are serious about wanting families to report changes, particularly things that have happened during this pandemic that might have exacerbated family situations. whatever that might be. So do not hesitate. It's okay. We encourage you to reach out to our financial aid offices as things change, not just the first year, but all the way through college. I'm working with families all the time of, sophomores, juniors, seniors of students where things have changed from the time they entered as freshmen. So we have authority to help you document those things, and then we can make changes. Very important for you to understand that. Okay, so that's a lot about the FAFSA and the process. And I mentioned there are all these programs. So you fill out the FAFSA, and then eligibility is determined for all these programs. In the state of Ohio, the need-based program is called the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, OCOG. You have to file the FAFSA, be an Ohio resident, et cetera. Household income lower than 96,000, and the EFC range 0 to 2190. If your EFC is the 2190 or lower, then you would automatically qualify for this grant if your student attends a school in Ohio. Part-time students get prorated awards, and it also includes summer if you enroll in summer. For the current year, we don't know exactly what it is for next year yet, but a school like Bluffton, Ohio, Northern Findlay, $3,700 a year. Public like Ohio State or OSU Lima, $2,200 a year, and a private or private for-profit, $1,400. We don't have a lot of those around, but they are eligible there too. So each year, this grant, I think it's going to be $4,000 next year. We have to confirm that, but this is called the OCOG. There's a lot of other Ohio programs which you can access at that website. And here's some of them: War Orphans, National Guard, Safety Officer, Memorial Scholarship, the Nurse Assistance Loan Program, Choose Ohio First. There's so many details, and these are much more difficult to obtain because you have to meet certain criteria. But if you do qualify, there's some significant money, so you might want to check those out. Just go to that website and explore each of those links to these different scholarships. On the federal side, the basic grant, as you might know, is called the Federal Pell Grant. For the current year, 21-22, again, we don't know what it's going to be for next year. They're supposed to have this decided by September 30th, but that Congress is a hot mess right now. So very unlikely we're going to know what the Pell Grant maximum is for next year for quite a while. But currently, if you have a 0 EFC, your student would receive a $6,495 Pell Grant for the academic year. Now, what's really important for this grant for you to know is that it is portable. No matter where your student attends, if they qualify for a Pell Grant, they will get the same dollars of Pell at Bluffton, at UCLA in California, at Rhodes State in Lima. It's the same regardless of where the student attends, what the cost of that school is, makes no difference because it's tied directly to your EFC, and it follows the student wherever the student attends, okay? So that's an important piece to know. And that's what that word portable means. Also, if you're part-time, and including summer, you might qualify for Pell. Then one of the programs I mentioned earlier is Federal SEOG, Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. This is a grant that schools are sent money, and then we have to distribute that money as best we can to our neediest students. So this is one of those programs that FAFSA priority deadline chart that I showed you earlier comes into play, because at Bluffton, after May 1st every year, we're usually out of this money. So if somebody files after our priority deadline, there's a good chance we can't award them any SEOG money, even if they otherwise would have qualified. They'll still get their Pell Grant, they'll still get student loans, but they're going to miss out on this kind of a program. Or federal work study is the other one that's campus-based. And here's just some of the information about that. I'm not going to read all of this, but I did note that I looked this up, that the minimum wage for Ohio in 2022 is scheduled to go up to $9.30 an hour. I have a question mark because until it happens, we won't know. But right now it's $8.80 an hour for minimum wage. So schools are going to pay at least that. And a lot of schools, because again, it's hard to find even student workers, are starting to pay more than the minimum wage. Then there's all the student loan programs, and I have a handout that goes into detail about, the interest rates and so forth on these loans, and the repayment terms and so forth. But there's subsidized and unsubsidized student loans, need-based, non-need-based. Subsidized limits. This is, again, true at every college in the country. Doesn't matter what college, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, community college, or whatever. Students can borrow up to $3,500 as a first-year student, $4,500 second year, $5,500 each of their junior, senior year, or if they're a 5th-year student. And then they can add on $2,000 unsub to that. If they don't qualify for the need-based loan, that $3,500 can be all unsubsidized, added to the $2,000 unsub. So all students can borrow up to $5,500 total their first year, $6,500 total their second year, $7,500 total their junior and senior years each. So that's explained in pretty good detail on this handout, including the interest rates and 10 years to repay and all that stuff. So here's how we calculate it. Again, cost minus EFC minus grants and scholarships that the student's receiving. And if there's still eligibility left over, we would apply a subsidized loan. If not, they would get the unsubsidized. And then there's a parent plus loan. So parent loan for undergraduate student is what PLUS stands for, the acronym. Plus loan for, parent loan for undergraduate student. And this is where a parent, after all the other aid is applied for the student, the parent can literally borrow up to the full cost of education, regardless of the EFC. And the same is true with private education loans, same principle. A lot of schools, we have private loans listed on our website that we encourage students to look at those as they're coming into our institution. If they're planning to use loans, compare that to the PLUS loan and so forth. So lots of opportunities, lots of ways to fund college. But the primary first way is for the student to get as much eligibility as possible from the federal government, the state government, the college itself, and then we mentioned these outside scholarships. Those are first and foremost the number one thing you want to look for. So as I'm finishing up my part, and we'll see if there's any questions that I can answer, but if you need help with the form itself, please feel free to call this 800 number. The people on the end of this line are trained to answer specific questions. They don't mind. Some people say, well, I don't want to ask a dumb question. As we say, there are no dumb questions. And starting October 1, their hours are extended to 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday, including the weekends, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. I should tell you that every Sunday morning, I don't know what time, maybe 2 a.m. till close to noon, you cannot fill out the FAFSA because every week they shut it down, online FAFSA, in order to do their weekly maintenance and clean up any errors that they're having. So just know that if you go out to FAFSA on the web during those hours, you'll see a message that it's not available for you to be filling it out on Sunday morning. So just FYI about that. To avoid errors, read the questions, read some of the handouts that I presented tonight, and complete all forms carefully. And that will go a long way. Again, double checking Social Security numbers, dates of birth, addresses, those kinds of things. Sometimes we get in a hurry and we just make mistakes. So be careful with all of that. There's my contact information. I don't mind. I don't care where your students are planning to attend. I'm always available to answer questions. I get questions from families all the time by email or phone. And I'm happy to do the best I can to address those questions, regardless of where your students are planning to attend. The goal is for them to go to the school where they want to be successful, where they plan to be successful, and I'm all about that. So don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, let's see. I'll check with Liz to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, Lawrence, I want to make one quick announcement. So I wasn't seeing the chat feature on my end, and that was because I have to refresh. So if there are any viewers out there who cannot see the chat, just hit the refresh on their YouTube viewing, and then that should pop the chat right up there for you. We do have one question. I do believe it's in reference to the FASFA net worth of investments when you're talking about assets. It's a question regarding stocks. And so when you're stating about the stocks in the, does this include stock options and not physical stock? That's the question.
Okay, well, I would say if there's current value in whatever, like if stocks would be cashed in on the day you're filling out the FAFSA, you would have to figure out what the value on that day of the stocks are. I'm not well versed in some of those particulars. That's because I won't say why, but anyway, all of my investments are through my retirement, so somebody else is managing that. So I don't know exactly the difference between physical stocks and stocks options, but if it's anything that you can sell as of that day you're filling out the FAFSA, then you would need to list the value as of that day. And that's an important point I probably didn't mention. When you're filling out the assets section, it's as of the day you're submitting the FAFSA or filling out the FAFSA, whereas income is based on 2020. Assets, like marital status, are on the date that you're filling out the form. So two different time frames that you're looking at. So I don't know if I answered the question. If I didn't, and you're really wanting an answer to that, I strongly encourage you to call that 800 number on this slide, and they will be able to answer that, I'm sure.
Thank you. And thank you for providing that too. I'm going to put that on my webpage as well, so that they have that, because some of these questions can get very specific and difficult. And I am not trained in this. And so, questions regarding scholarships and where to go to apply for the FAFSA, which I do have a link on the webpage, I can help with that. But this is very important to have definitely this Federal Student Aid Information Center for questions, because inevitably there will be questions that pop up, I'm sure, as you're going through the document.
Mhm.
I'm just checking here. I'm not seeing any new questions. So maybe leave it up for just a couple, just anybody real quick if gets a question in, maybe the next minute or so.
Well,
And then
Liz,
go ahead.
I'm just now looking at my own handout and on investments, and it clearly says, so I can answer the question now. It clearly says investments include, and I won't read the whole list, but it goes on to say money market funds, mutual funds, certificates of deposit, stocks options. So it's both stocks and stock options, bonds, other securities. There's a whole list on this handout. So sorry, I didn't have that off the tip of my tongue.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I know, we did provide him a lot of paperwork here. So a lot of good information. We are not having any new questions. So at that, I want to thank you for doing this for our students, for our parents. I appreciate you giving your time to do this so that we can all become more knowledgeable on the FAFSA. Thank you, parents. Thank you, students, for watching, and all have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
This has been a presentation of BHS Productions. We'd like to thank everybody for participating here. We'd like to thank our presenters tonight, Lawrence Matthews, Director of Financial Aid at Bluffton University, and Dr. Elizabeth Smith, High School Guidance Counselor at BHS. For any more information or to set up an appointment, please contact Dr. Smith at the High School Guidance Counselor or by email. Thank you so much, and everybody have a very wonderful night.